Good morning, everyone. I see that we're all bright-eyed after that long weekend that we had. And we are here to call to order the May 29th Glendale City Council study session regarding the Capital Improvement Program. May we have roll call, please?
Council members Draymond, Quintero, Weaver,
Here.
Yusefian,
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here.
Here.
Mr. Starbird.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I hope you all had a safe and enjoyable Memorial Day weekend. We're here for the second study session focusing on our capital improvement program. You recall at the last study session, the week before last, you had an overview of the CIP. We thought now we'd begin to bore down into the detail of the program, begin to get into some of the specific projects and programs that are outlined for what is a 10-year projected capital improvement program. As I noted 2 weeks ago, however, the crystal ball in projecting some of the needs and the funding can be very clear in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But as we get into the out years, of course, it's harder to predict and anticipate, and for that reason, we schedule most of the items up front. And as you get farther out, you'll see fewer and fewer projects being projected. That doesn't mean the need doesn't exist. It certainly does. We have needs that far outstrip the resources, but we leave the greatest amount of flexibility in the out years. Today, we'll begin to go through some of the detail, I believe, starting with the fire department and the funding for fire stations. You might recall at your last study session that matter arose relative to the need for fire stations. So we've asked Chief Gray to put together a presentation for you and touch on that. Everybody's prepared, though, to begin to work through the details of the CIP as time permits this morning. With that, Ron, did you want to say anything before we turn to the Chief?
Yes, if I could. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of Council. Last week we passed out to you revised capital improvement program, and I actually have 3 handouts that were in that packet. The first handout is our actual capital improvement program. It is 19 pages, titled CIP Draft Number 8. And what the major revision occurred between the prior version and this one was I added a column to the far left-hand side called existing balance. So what that number is money that is unspent and unencumbered, uncommitted in that project, if there is currently money set aside for that project. Some of these projects are brand new, so you'll see a zero balance there. On the second sheet, which is 4 pages, you will notice these are our unfunded projects. And again, if there's an existing project out there, we have an existing balance column on that worksheet as well.
Ron, if I can. So the first handout, the page 1 of 19 pages, that column actually starts then on page 3, which is where the
Correct.
appropriations begins. You won't see it on the first and second page because that's resources and revenues. You'll see it beginning on page 3.
Correct.
So funder grant is money that was received prior to?
Funder grant is basically money that is received out from sources outside the city of Glendale, so it's either federal grants or state grants, or it could be cross-referencing if we have redevelopment money in here or transit money or so forth.
But is it money previously received?
It's or money that will be received where we actually have
Projections of
assigned
what?
grant. Right. Could either be past or future.
Okay, in future, we don't know the validity of
But we could be
Okay.
anticipating as part of the CIP.
those
Sir,
past, we know exactly.
Right.
Mr. Yusefian.
On your first page of 1 of 19, there are a couple of categories like less transfer to financial system operation fund, less transfer to wireless communication system operation fund, less transfer to technology equipment replacement fund, and less MSB lease payment. So all of these things you're showing, you're deducting $400,000. The other one is $750,000 for the next, for all 10 years. Are you doing this because we don't need that money into that system anymore? What's the purpose of removing this money out of there?
The purpose is actually transfer these resources to our internal service funds. As you mentioned, our financial system, our wireless, our technology, this is a contribution from the capital improvement program to those internal service funds.
So we're transferring $400,000 from capital improvements into that fund?
Correct.
And why is it put in the parentheses? I don't understand that.
Well, let me help here, Ron. This is the resources component. So if you're transferring money out, it becomes a negative or a draw on your resources. So it's shown as a negative. Think of these three as you would a project, because they're drawing on resources. But the view was that we should keep track of all of the expenses, for example, of the wireless communication system. All that should be tracked in the wireless communication fund. So we set this up. You could look at it like a project. We set it up so that you've got $750,000 a year coming out of our general CIP fund going over into the internal service fund that supports our wireless communication system, so we can track all of those costs in one place.
Okay, but when we transferred all of the operations from CIP into operations, part of the deal was that we weren't going to take operation-related issues and put them into the CIP again. So, this is part of operation. It is to replace an existing wireless communication system, right? So wouldn't that come out of the operation part? Wouldn't that come out of your general fund part? Or are we getting down to a slippery slope to a point that we start moving all of these things into this, and then 4 years later we find out that we have all this money going into the general fund to create all those, and then there will be nothing left in the CIP?
Well, it's for capital replacement. You're right, it's replacement, but it's capital. And if you pull it out of here, it has to go somewhere. We do charge the other operating departments, so this would be like the general fund share of what those costs would be.
Correct.
And it is for capital replacement, capital upgrading as the existing system wears out over time.
Well, and in all due respect, the same argument could have been given about the sidewalks, because we do have new installation of sidewalks in capital improvement, and then we have repair of sidewalks in in general fund. We moved over $1 million from capital improvements into the general fund, saying that this is not new, we're replacing it, we're fixing it, and so on and so forth. So couldn't that same argument be made on this?
Well, for example,
My worry is that we start doing all this stuff, and I know ISIS, we're going to have to spend another $4 or $5 million, $8 million a couple of years down the road to be compliant with Project 25, and all of our systems with your system that sometimes needs to be upgraded all the time. Actually, $400,000 is pretty low compared to the amount of money we spend on there. At one point, we will go from what we are now at 14% or whatever.
Correct.
although if I can,
We'll go down to maybe 4%.
Using your analogy, though, a lot of the capital in the CIP is replacement and upgrading. I mean, fire stations, libraries, they may be new buildings, but they're replacing existing buildings. The streets, I mean, all of our streets are essentially paved, all of our sidewalks are essentially in. We're replacing existing infrastructure with these payments. There's very little new stuff, with exception, for example, a pool, aquatics facility, or maybe you do build an additional community center or you build a new park. But a lot of what we do in the CIP is replacement of existing infrastructure.
One is brick and mortar. This one, technology, we're talking about handsets. Every 5 years you're going to do that. That's why you put a depreciation on the side.
Well, but we don't in the general fund. That's the problem. We don't make enough room in the general fund to replace all of that equipment.
Well, for myself, what I'm saying is maybe we should start making some of those rooms.
You can. It'll have an impact on programs.
Oh.
In a year in which you've got other pressures already in the general fund, for example, the UUT loss, which we do need to begin to plan for. So those are policy decisions you can make, and we can come back to you with the implications.
And what is the MSP lease payment for $1.3 million?
Councilmember Yusefian, this is the loan that the City Council approved last September, if my memory is right, for $8 million so that we can do the work on the MSB, because we did not have
retrofit?
FEMA
This is the
authority
retrofit.
to actually the extra money. So this is the loan that was, and so this is the payment on the loan.
So it may be, instead of lease payment, you should say loan payment.
And it's actually a lease.
It is a lease.
It's actually, it's a lease document. I'm sorry if
To
I'm
us.
using...
Yeah,
Okay.
technically,
Okay.
you've got a loan secured by lease payments
Okay. So from general fund, from the capital?
from the CIP. It's money coming out of the capital improvement program.
Right.
Okay. And by 2014, it'll be all paid off?
That is correct.
And to the extent, I don't know, Steve, have we given up on FEMA at this point, or is there still a chance?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Starbird, we've never given up. They may have given up on us, but we continue to browbeat them, looking for an opening. It's just
So to the
really
extent that
difficult.
we can continue to get FEMA money for that retrofit, then we'll pay this down sooner.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, Ron, let's,
Okay.
are we back to you or to the chief?
Okay. I'm going to go to the chief.
You got a PowerPoint there?
Yeah, I sure do.
Scott.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Starbird, thank you. Based on the most recent study discussion, we thought it would be helpful to give a little additional information on fire station replacement. This has been a topic of discussion for many years. A little perspective. We're fortunate to be joined with the library in several of our facilities. Actually, that dates back to from the early days. Station 22, that was Station 2, the Tropico Station, which was at 1501 South Brand, which is now the Red Cross headquarters, was also a library and a fire station. You may recall we rebuilt that station over its current location to 1201 South Glendale, Glendale and Palmer. That's Station 22's new location. And so we're there as well.
Chris, we have a possible conflict issue. As you know, I've stated publicly that I do have a interest in real estate located adjacent to the 1145 North Brand Fire Station 26 structure, and I think ethic rules and FPPC rules would prevent me from participating in any discussion that would revolve around any sort of funding or discussion as to the eventual outcome of that building. However, I can discuss Fire Station 29 if we can segregate it in such a manner. So,
Mr. Mayor, let me add, that was why, and I forgot about this, that was why we had scheduled this first, so you could step out of the initial discussion of the Verdugo fire station. But if you step out now, we'll lose a quorum. So we do need to adjust here. Maybe Chris, we can focus.
We can make that adjustment very easily.
Focus on 29 and have that conversation, or should we move on to a different topic
Have
altogether?
to move on to another topic. FPPC rules do allow for segregation and segmenting, as they call it, but you have to deal with the issue where the conflict exists first and resolve that issue before the individual with the conflict can then become
Okay, so we
involved in the
need to
secondary
hold
act.
on discussing fire stations until we get another council member here. All right.
And then I'll my recommendation.
Okay, well, let's go to Plan
all right,
B.
Chief.
No problem.
Plan B would be, we would focus on page 3 of 19, and we would start with our neighborhood business district improvement project, and then we'd hop right into our public works projects.
Expenditure 3 of 19.
So we're on page 3 of 19.
Fire station, next item in line is expenditure.
So under the heading of economic, housing, and community development
Under that
projects.
heading, that is correct.
You know, Ron, as we take those up, it might be worthwhile to remind ourselves again of some of the programming and some of the cushion that we've structurally created in the CIP. If you'll turn back to page 1 of 19, just as a reminder, I know we touched on this before, but it might be useful to remind us. Look down under expenditures, and there you'll see to-be-programmed contingency. You see we have $1 million plugged in the first 2 years, then $3 million a year, going out through the 10-year program. So if that money was never used, we call it to be programmed, it's really a contingency. If that money were never used at the end of 10 years, you'd have $26 million have built up in this fund, provided resources are as we anticipated and expenditures were as we anticipated. In addition, if you look at the next line, the estimated ending fund balance, given that same hypothetical scenario, revenues all came in the way we think they will, expenditures are as we anticipate they will, so projects come on time, at least within budget for all of those that are projected. You'd have an ending balance in the CIP at the end of 10 years of $16,646,000, right, Ron?
Correct.
So theoretically, you could add those two numbers together, 26 million and 16.6 for $42 million.
42.
$42 million and change that at the end of 10 years you'd have in this fund. So over the life of the CIP, you have that kind of capacity to fund additional projects over and above what you have in the CIP. Additionally, to the extent that you want to reduce projects, you could have more capacity. To the extent you want to increase projects or add new projects, you're eating into that amount. The second thing to keep in mind is one of timing. You see in the early years is where you have the largest load in the CIP because it's easier to anticipate the projects that are on the nearest horizon as opposed to farther out, the greatest capacity in the out years. And you can see that if you look down either at the estimated fund balance ending or at the annual surplus, which is a running tally of how much you have remaining in the fund. Noting that the to-be program money is treated like an expenditure, even though it hasn't been committed. So in addition to the estimated fund balance or the annual surplus, you have that to-be programmed money. So as you look at projects, you have to keep in mind both the capacity over the length of the CIP as well as the resources you have in any 1 year to fund additional projects.
Mr. Starbird, one other, but I asked this before, I want to make sure. Are these numbers all in today's dollars, or do they have CPI?
They're all in today's dollars.
They're all today's dollars.
Today's dollars, okay.
Question is, on annual surplus, for 2007-8, you're showing a negative of $597,000. So in reality, that $1 million that you spent, that you didn't spend, you're not going to really have $1 million because you have a negative of $597,000. So if you pay that $597,000 left out of that $1 million, so you have less left.
Let me see if I can explain it a different way, Councilmember Yusefian. The annual surplus or shortfall is just the available resources minus the annual expenditures. So all it means is that we are spending down by $597 our fund balance.
So the answer to your question is really no. You still have the $1 million to be programmed, and you have $52,000 in your fund balance.
So what is $597,000?
That's how much your expenditures exceeded your current resources. So it doesn't include your fund balance.
Only for that
okay.
year.
Just kind
Only
of a-
for that year.
Just kind of a cash flow for that year.
Okay.
The more important number is the estimated fund balance. And so at the end of 07-08, if everything came out as projected, you'd have $1 million from your to-be program, assuming it's not really spent, and $52,000, so you'd have $1,052,000 in your CIP.
Okay.
Okay? The $597 is just a reflection of the extent to which you've dipped into, I'll call it your fund balance or your reserves, to achieve the program for that year.
So on 2010 and 11, I'm going to have to dip in $3.457 million?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, but you'll still have a fund balance. Again, if you
Of
have...
$3 million.
Well, in addition to that, if you
3.7.
haven't spent your to-be programmed, you'd add up $1 million and $1 million and $3 million and $3 million. You'd have an additional $8 million if you haven't spent your to-be programmed money.
Okay, and here, we had done this $1 million to be spent. How much do we have there? Previous years. To be programmed contingency, is this when we're starting for the first time, or we started a couple of years ago?
We've had this category for a few years, but it's all wrapped up, if you want to think of it,
In your
into
fund
your
balance.
estimated beginning fund balance of $649 in that first column, middle of the page under 2007-8.
Here's your beginning fund balance up here. So at the
Okay.
end of 06-07, you had $650,000 in this fund. So you had dipped into this to the extent of about $300,000 for various things.
Oh, okay.
So you have, this gets added in as a resource. This is, see, and this number less this number is this number here.
Okay. So previously, we had some of those $1 million. We spent some of them, and we didn't spend some of them.
Correct.
That's right. Any project that you approve in the middle of the year, any approvals you give to overruns on existing projects will eat into that money first.
Okay. Got it.
Would we like to start back up on fire stations?
Well, is this a good,
Well, no, we hadn't started yet on fire
Couldn't start
stations.
without you here.
sorry, I have a
He's
conflict
got a conflict. He's got to step out.
on the fire
We
station,
wouldn't have
so I
a
have to
quorum
step out.
until you showed up.
So we can either go,
let's start.
we can either go to fire.
It'd be good to go back to fire stations, because that creates less of an issue as we then go through the balance of the CIP.
Okay. All right, then,
Goodbye.
as stated, I'm going to step down, and can I be in the audience?
No,
Or do I need to?
you have to be outside.
And you're passing your gavel to,
Who's the pro tem?
I don't have my sheet.
I don't know.
Just give it to whoever you like.
Don't give it to me if you want to ask questions.
The meeting's adjourned. All right, I take that back. We'll proceed. Chief Craig, go ahead, please.
Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council, based on some questions that had come up at our last study session, we've compiled some information to, again, provide additional information on the fire station replacement. I've got a brief PowerPoint I can go through. One of the suggestions here is that that's included in the CIP. The programming for both the fire stations has been included, but because of some difficulties in finding a suitable solution for the library adjacent to Station 26 at Casa Verdugo, we're electing to move forward with Station 29, where we had, earlier we had programmed Station 26 into replacement. Just a quick review on the current status. Glendale is served by 9 fire stations, and the breakdown is with the engine companies and then the truck companies, 3 of which you see here identified on the PowerPoint. One of those is at Station 21, and the other 2 are at Station 26 and Station 29, respectively. Station 26 being at Brand and Stocker, and then Station 29 on Honolulu at 2465, our Montrose station. As of March 1st, we added an additional rescue ambulance, and those 3 stations, 21, 22, 26 and 29, also have a rescue ambulance with 2 firefighter paramedics. And then additionally, we have rescue ambulances at Station 22, which is at Glendale and Palmer. That was one of the stations that was replaced in the late 80s, along with Station 25. And then the most recent station that we replaced, Station 21, was completed in 1993. Just a quick review on the incidents and the breakdown. It's fairly consistent, about 15,000. Our incident rate is up about 2.4% this year. The 2 stations that are scheduled for replacement, Fire Station 26, built in 1951, about just under 7,000 square feet, and houses, again, the truck, engine, and ambulance. Roughly 10 firefighters are on duty, and 7,000 responses. Station 29, again, that's actually not correct, that built date. That's 1961. It is approximately 10,000 square feet, and then again houses the same complement of equipment, and you can see the responses there as well at 3,000 and 0506. From my recollection, we discussed the replacement of Station 26 and 29 as early as 1990. That situation was specifically addressed prior to the completion of Station 21. Discussions that we've had over the years, we're looking for the time and opportunity. It should be recognized, and I think everyone will agree, a fire station is an integral part of a community, and it's a service to the community. In this case, we're adjoined by libraries in both of these situations, and they provide outstanding service to the community. One of the, yes, Councilman Youssef.
Don't go too far. you're showing for 2005, 2006, there's a total of 14,970 incidences.
Yes.
Out of that, Fire Station 26 handles 7,000 of them, almost half.
And you have to recognize that multiple fire stations handle calls. As an example, on Sunday, we joined L.A. City with 2 second alarm fires, a brush fire in the north end of town adjacent to Glendale, and then a serious structure fire over in L.A. City. Those 2 incidents, we had 8 Glendale units at that one incident. So that's on Brazil Street, where we lost the 53 cars in a large warehouse.
So you could have 3 or 4 or 5
you
or
can
6
have 3 or 4 or 5, 6
stations
stations responding to one incident. So that's where this comes up. It's just how you look at it. But they responded to a total of those calls.
So this 7,000, it's not just them, it's somebody else also
Correct.
included?
We could isolate the ones where Station 26 solely went on, but obviously this is a function of risk management and really
it's an operation. There's
trying to
7,000
send-
operations
Exactly.
run out of this thing. And
Correct.
that's what I wanted to know.
Where you want to have the closest available unit to manage the
Right.
problem. Big fires start small, keep it small.
Is this station the one that has the most?
No,
7,000 is a lot.
there are other stations that have more. Station 21 has more calls
Far more.
here.
Okay.
Chief Bray, you said, or you mentioned 10 firefighters per day. Do you mean per shift? Are they also there at night?
But they're there for 24-hour periods, round-the-clock staffing. Which, and actually, when you think about it, we've got 207,000 people here. We've got 60 firefighters on duty. Again, it's a function of risk management. We provide essentially coverage that we feel is acceptable on a day-to-day basis, often recognizing that we need assistance of outside agencies in order to do the job. But our aggressive attack is really to keep those incidents to a manageable level. Let me go back one more on this, Ron. Some of the issues that led us to study and bring in an outside consultant, going through the 90s, we realized that both of these stations needed to be replaced. In discussions with our city manager, it was also recognized that there may be some opportunities here. We wanted to look at future growth, whether we could combine existing stations, whether we were going to have to add stations. And so it was really felt it was appropriate to look at not only the building conditions, but also any changes in service level, changes in Glendale, traffic, demographics, and certainly fire service demands, and really trying to look closely and determine, are the current stations well located? Are they suitable not only for now into the future? It doesn't make a lot of sense to go ahead and look at replacing a couple of stations without looking at all the existing locations. So that was really the primary purpose of the study and the issues that led up to it.
There was a speaker 2 weeks ago that brought up the issue that the consultant we hired, their specialty was in library services and not in fire stations. How do you mitigate that issue?
We hired an individual that had a lot of experience with geographical information services. We hired an individual that had a lot of experience with Glendale and data. We were not looking for someone that had experience with fire stations. There are national standards of cover. The insurance service offices recognizing where fire stations should be located. All of that data was readily available. What we were most interested in is analyzing nearly 20 years of response data to determine where best are those fire stations located. This particular individual had just finished a master plan with the libraries and had looked at several of the libraries, two of which adjoined the fire stations that we were looking at replacing. So to us, it made good sense of bringing him in, and he also had an architect, Peter Masakos, that worked with us that did have municipal experience as well. And I think it was a good team taking advantage of our technical expertise in terms of the fire stations and then their expertise in GIS.
The primary expertise was in analyzing data. And in this case, the data is the calls, the nature of the calls, where they're responding to, the equipment they're responding with. And that's really a function of analyzing data. And that's what the primary firm did very well, was analyzing data.
See in the report, they even analyzed, what effect would it have if we moved even one of those fire station locations a quarter mile on both current and projected growth? We essentially looked at a 20-year window, but also pushed things in terms of population up to 2012. We looked at SCAG data. SCAG data tells us that the population by 2012 in Glendale should be 216,000. We're at 207. And since the 2000 census, we've grown from 194,000 that was reported there. So a lot of the data that we used we felt was very effective, but it was really trying to project, are we going to need more fire stations in the future? Because we did really, as most of us know, during the 80s, we added a city within a city. We added thousands and thousands of people and really did not add to the infrastructure. All we've added is call load. So we wanted to look closely at that, and this particular consultant was well suited to do that.
Okay, and a follow-up on that from the city attorney. Would that explanation hold us harmless from further litigation in case something happens?
Now I'll have to ask the fire chief to repeat that explanation.
Okay, and what I'm saying is somebody come back and say, you know, my wife died because the fire station you guys built was not appropriately located, you couldn't get to me on time, and so on and so forth, because your consultant was specialist in libraries, not fire department. Now, the explanation he gave, would that hold us harmless in a court of law?
I didn't hear the explanation he gave, but generally speaking, there are immunities for failing to respond to fires and other emergency situations. The location of a fire station generally is not going to be a situation that's going to subject you to liability. It's very speculative as to whether or not that would be the cause or effect of appropriate response time, and response time generally is not an issue for liability.
Okay, thank you.
And in effect, what was recommended that the fire stations were actually well sited. They were in probably the best locations they could be, and you've got to recognize that a lot of growth has occurred, particularly in the area of Station 26, north of there. Literally, that entire southern slope of the Verdugos has been developed with all of the homes, particularly at the very north end of the response district. So,
I've got a question. I was going to wait, but as long as we're talking about the siting, Fire Station 29 and the proposed location across the street.
Yes.
How many responses are to the west, to the south, and to the north versus responses to the east? Because I've been at the Montrose, been in downtown Montrose a number of times where I've seen the trucks go right through the shopping district. So I'm just curious, is the largest percentage, looking at the current setup, the largest percentage of responses to the south, to the west, and to the north? Or...
We haven't analyzed that specifically to segregate each direction. We could look at in providing some of that data, but I can just tell you anecdotally what I see is based on the geography. And we have Verdugo Hills Hospital directly to the east, so there obviously are some transport issues that go on. And Honolulu is a thoroughfare, and often, I often say that that street is closed more than any other street in the city. It's closed at least once a week for some type of events and activities. So we use alternative response routes. We use Broadview and others to get around there. There's increasing population density, though, that's occurring because of some condominiums and a number of other things that really pull us more to the west. We're being pulled to the west and to the northwest area of the city predominantly. You also probably recognize that there are a number of convalescent care facilities in that area. Those are also high response facilities for us as well.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Well, Chris, I'm sorry, but it was that sort of intuitive feeling that Station 29 is too far out there and could be moved in or consolidated that really brought on hiring the firm to look at all the data to analyze the call.
I guess I'm thinking of a location closer to the hospital, closer to that freeway, rather than next to the shopping.
And we have the detail, but when it got right down to it, I mean, it was actually well sited. And we actually, using GIS, but we physically moved the location in several different ways, and it all came back. It was actually well sited.
Mr. Drain.
Well,
Councilman Draymond.
I'm not a consultant, but my family's had a business there since 1949, and I am very well versed with that district. And with all due respect to you, Chief Gray, I respectfully disagree. We have emergency traffic going up and down Honolulu Avenue quite a lot, and most of it is eastbound. Just as you say, most of it is headed to the hospital and medical center and so on. The Montrose Shopping Park was one of the earliest examples of traffic calming. In 1967, when the shopping park was created, that wasn't the beginning of the business district, but that was the beginning of the shopping park. The most controversial element, believe it or not, in 1967 was that S curve, that serpentine curve in the road. And as a matter of fact, that curve was part of the logo for the shopping park in the 60s. It is meant to slow down traffic. And we have crosswalks that come out of areas that are curb extensions and little bump outs and banks of landscaped areas. I am concerned about it. I'm concerned about what I'm hearing from the other merchants with regard to that. It's no secret I've been asking about a different location, and that location is adjacent to the hospital in the former Texaco site on Verdugo Boulevard, which is about 4 or 5 blocks east. I'd like to see the consultant's answer to not whether that is a perfectly suited site where it is, but what the difference is
moving it out
in those 4 or 5 blocks. For those of you who are not familiar with the site, it is basically the corner of Hillside and Verdugo Boulevard, and it is an extension of the Indian Springs Shopping Center. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Wait.
Yes.
So the answer to that question, did the consultant look at that particular site? When you guys moved things around in the GIS, did you move it to that site?
I'm trying to date back. We looked at this. This was in 2003 when they were doing the work in 2002, 2003, and I'm not sure that was vacant at the time. It was probably pretty close.
It's been vacant for
at least 3-4 years. Yeah, at least, so it was probably pretty close. But we did not look at that specifically. Sometimes you do run into difficulty if you move a site literally to the corner of the city. Where Hillside is in Los Angeles County. It's absolutely on the border. And that was one of the concerns about Station 29, because literally the county is in our backyard behind the fire station and the library. And, you would think most of your responses would, be south. But as been mentioned, really they're omnidirectional. We do transport, obviously, to that hospital, but we also go to other hospitals, and the shortest route to get onto the 2 freeway, to get at Adventist and everything, is right through Honolulu and the shopping park. So that's
Chris, isn't it
true.
fair to say the CIP deals with the funding? It doesn't deal with the specific design or placement. We've made maybe a big assumption that the Paradise Ford lot could be a logical site for a new station. If indeed we need to look at other locations, then we'll look at other
We'll certainly do
locations.
that.
That may have an effect on cost, though, because we've anticipated Paradise Ford already purchased. It may be a more expensive site to develop to the extent we want to also provide parking there, but at least it's land that's available. You don't have to acquire improvements or relocate people. But that isn't really a question that comes into play in the CIP. CIP is about funding, but certainly funding could be impacted if indeed we want to look for a different location than Paradise Ford. But that's a decision that you all can make, and if the Paradise Ford lot is not a good location for a host of reasons, then we have to start looking for other locations.
Mr. Weaver. Mr. Weaver.
Chris, is there another fire station further west of this one?
Further west, yes, there is Fire Station 28. It's at Community in New York.
Okay.
And that serves really the remainder of the city over
Over
there.
to Lowell. That's what I was
I
trying to
might
picture.
remark, too, just some of the square footages of the site. The site that's being referred to off of Hillside in Verdugo, it is not a large site. It's a site of what you would consider an average-sized service station. So it's likely much smaller than the current site that's occupied by the Fire Station 29 now. It's also it's probably a difficult site, but we'll certainly look at that, and we'll certainly analyze the additional data. But as Mr. Starbird said, this has really been a function of looking at funding and trying to project these replacements within the next couple of years.
A quick question from me. Fire Station 28, that's a full-service
There's one engine.
fire station,
One
one
engine is
engine.
located there, and it has a full-time paramedic as a component there.
Mr. Yusefian, then Mr. Drain.
The issue of funding is, as you said, let's go back to the issue of funding. There is currently $1.2 million in that account. That is void of I think we paid 1.678, something of that nature. I don't remember exactly what we paid for the Paradise Ford site. If we go to a different site, we have to also include the cost of purchasing the land for a new site. So when you sit here and you're looking at the CIP, $1.2 million you put aside, and you need another $11 million. So if you're going to purchase something else, now you're going to have to put in some more for that purchase of land. If we're going to do that, do you have any idea, or anybody has any idea what that site amount will be? Will it be $3 million, $2 million?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Draymond.
that is why I raised the issue now. I realize, I am quite aware that this is a budget study session. I am quite aware that this is not a session to determine policy regarding where we're going to put a service station. I raise the issue now because we are speaking exactly of the kinds of questions that Mr. Yusefian just raised. Let's also keep in mind, and I, having stood exactly where the chief is standing now, have heard from this council any number of times that parking lot was not purchased as a site for a future fire station, but for parking. And we can pull the archived data for that if you'd like to see it. I have it.
Speaking of data, I always thought the best bet was a mini park and a community center there in addition to the parking. Mister,
Well, and
I lost that argument.
You don't have to pull the archives, because I've said many times that property, here in a public meeting, that property was acquired for the purpose of providing parking. That's why it's very possible that if that were the site, the construction cost could be even considerably more than what we have listed here, because, for example, if we were to provide parking, you might very well have to deck the property for parking underneath or on top of what would be a fire station. This just anticipates a fairly simple, straightforward, build a fire station on a flat piece of land. But if we were to provide parking, as we've talked about just conceptually, you might have to build a fire station on the level grade, but then provide subterranean parking underneath. If you did that, it's probably going to be typical $20,000, $30,000 a space on top of this cost. Certainly at this point, if there's an interest in looking at other sites, then we need to do some work on that, but also need to go back and take a look at what kind of figures we have built in here for Station 29.
Well, before we do that, I would like what Mr. Quintero says. I want to see the data for the last 2 years or 3 years of where was your service provided to. Was it to the south? Was it to the east? Was it to the west? And so this way, there needs to be some justification for moving this thing. So give me the last 3 years. It will say so many trips were made to the west, so many trips were made to the east, so many trips were north, to the south. So then this way we know what is the best location? If majority of the trips are going to go to the south and west and north, and fewer to the east, then it doesn't justify it. But if it shows that most of the ambulances are going toward the hospital, and that's the direction it's going, then maybe we should be looking at something else. So I will not be able to make that decision until I get that data from you, and you're the only one who has access to that data.
We can certainly provide that. Monthly, actually, we show a plot of the density of the calls. It's not difficult to extract, and we can show it right down to the call. And again, this has been our best guess. You can go back in time and look at where fire stations have been located. Some of them make sense, some of them do not. Our attempt here was to try to see what made the most sense. Obviously, when Fire Station 21 was rebuilt, probably not the best location for us from a response standpoint, but the property was available based on what had occurred with the development of the Galleria. It would likely have been better suited over here in the area with the rest of the other civic facilities. So, but we'll certainly take a close look at that.
Mr. Drain.
Yeah, and just for the record, just to make it absolutely clear, whether or not the majority of calls are to the east, west, north, or south is not the determination. In and of itself is not the determining factor in my book, and I think that will be proven as to whether or not that is the best location for the station. Perfect example is that if the main route between the current station and the most logical and most oft-traveled site, which is Verdugo Hills Hospital, let's say, is the Montrose Shopping Park, which is Honolulu Avenue, which is a slower route than, say, Montrose Avenue or some other route.
Broadview or Montrose.
Yes, then it might be more efficient, even though the calls may be in a different direction. Remember, you're moving in a direction that's closer to Montecito Park, closer to Spar Heights, closer to the Valley High section. Simply whether there are more calls north, south, east, or west doesn't answer the question of efficiency of delivering service. So that's another thing to look at as well.
That's what I was going to say. Where the calls are going to is only half of the equation. The next equation is what do you do with the people once you pick them up? You're obviously headed to Verdugo Hills.
Yes, and this is talking about the emergency medical component of it. There's obviously the fire component too. The placement of the ladder truck is also critical to that, as is response time. And certainly that has bearing as well. But we'll come back with further
to the capital
analysis
improvement
there.
portion of the presentation.
Okay, why don't we continue on here? And again, this was just a reiteration, at least on the PowerPoint, of why we were doing this and with the mapping study. We also looked at the report that was done through Public Works, AME, that established a measure and an index for the condition of existing facilities. That was also evaluated. Next. And again, looking at those incident response times that's been said here. Just continue going. This is just a snapshot of really where the data, we looked at nearly the 20 years worth of data here from 83 to 2002, and you can see that the climb there in EMS incidents, and then obviously the study recommended the addition of 2 rescue ambulance, one which we completed at Fire Station 22 here in March. A future one was projected within 5 to 10 years, and another growth area out at Station 27, which is at Western and Glen Oaks. This again, fire incidents, they've really maintained a steady average of at about 2,000 calls. This city in particular has been very aggressive about built-in fire protection, about fire prevention programs, about strong code enforcement and education. We believe that combined with the outstanding services provided by the firefighters minimize really a lot of the losses that go on traditionally in a city of this size. These are just common issues that we found in both of the fire stations, and obviously, these are facilities that the community enjoys. They're really underutilized in some of those areas for emergency response training, which was a high need based on the long-range plan within the communities, and the surveys were done. And a lot of these facilities, as you can imagine, it's a 24/7 intense use. So they do age differently than a facility that really has part-time use. Looking at Station 26 options, obviously, the best location is the existing one. We've looked at a number of options, but would all involve purchasing additional land, and obviously, with both of these locations, there's the important component of the library that's next door, and ideally improving those facilities as well, which serve thousands of members of the public. And certainly, in Station 26's location, we had looked at some additional property. You're going to have to relocate both facilities temporarily while the reconstruction is done. The entire site there is about 26,000 square feet. It's an L-shaped lot with access from Stalker and from Brand. And the proposed fire station was at 18,000 square feet. The existing station is, like we referred to before, is about 6,800 square feet.
Question.
Yes.
You say
Mayor
about
Pro Tem Councilman
relocating both of those temporarily.
While you demolish.
Where are you going to relocate them? I mean, that's what I want to know. I know that area like the back of my hand. There's not a single parcel that is not built on. Where are you going to relocate them?
We've talked with a number of real estate developers and property owners in the immediate area. We've also looked at, and at least with how you address the fire side of it, and Nancy can certainly address the library, but the possibility of for a short period of time, splitting up the units, relocating the truck, keeping the RA and the engine centralized. We could move the ladder truck some distance, so it just depends on what kind of property is available. But we have looked at temporary quarters at Glen Oaks and Brand, the old Ralph's building.
Okay, you mean the parking structure there? You're going to use that? The old Ralph
Actually, it's
building.
Republic the title company was in there for several years.
Right.
That's now vacant.
It's vacant now?
It's vacant,
Okay.
and they're not going to do anything with that for several years. So there's an opportunity there. We all know the church property, the Methodist church was purchased by Incarnation. There's property there as well that's available for temporary quarters. And so with the use of some modular buildings and things, we feel we could address that relatively easily.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can. But it's those complexities that caused us to flip the timing of 29 with 26, and now we may see 29 taking more time, to the extent we may be looking at other sites, but it's the complexities of the interim use and a permanent location for a library that caused us to put 29 further up in the schedule and push 26 further out, just because we know it's going to be more difficult to try and solve the problem on 29 in terms of location of both interim location as well as permanent location for both fire station and library.
Oh, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I think it would behoove us to do 26 first, because I didn't know that the title company is empty now. That's an opportunity we have. We could lease that out for library, maybe part of it library, and have the rest of it for administrative offices for that. It has a very large parking structure, area, so you could maybe put some temporary buildings to hold some of the trucks. If it gets leased out, we're done. That one's going to be gone. So I think if we're going to do anything, it's obvious based on the number of calls that go out of Fire Station 26, we have twice as many as the 29. So I would say that is more critical to deal with all these condominium projects coming in also. So with the hotel and all that stuff, so I mean, in my mind, I think now that we have some places that are available, we could lease it for temporary basis. That's the direction I would think that would be the best thing to do, and move in that direction, and then deal with the Montrose one later as we deal with some of the statistical data and so on and so forth.
We can take a look at that. The fire station may be easier to solve that component on 26 than is the library, because what are you going to do after the interim location? Fire gets to move back into a new station. Library doesn't have a place. If the library doesn't have a place to go, then what do we do about the branch library? And that's been the component that's been hardest. If we devote the existing location to a fire station, we have to have an eventual permanent location for a library to go to. And you're familiar with the various options we've had on libraries, and believe me, we've been pursuing all kinds of different approaches to that to try and solve that problem. I think the important part relative to the CIP is the funding that we have put in here. I mean, it could be that we flop them back again if indeed something arises that makes sense, or if it doesn't, we may have both of these being kicked out farther to the extent we continue to have a problem with location on 26 and 29. So I think the important point is we have funding here. In all likelihood, we're going to find that relative to 29, it may or may not be enough. And we could have 26 pushed up sooner and 29 take the secondary spot or vice versa. But we do have funding in here for presumably 2 stations, anticipating it'd be enough if the fire stations were fairly simple and we didn't have to acquire additional land for it.
Mr. Draymond.
These numbers, do they include the temporary location or relocation of a fire station?
In 29's case, no. In 26's case, there was some money programmed in there for relocation. Under the ideal scenario with 29, obviously, that wouldn't be necessary if we were able to utilize the property across the street.
We've even looked at, with respect to 26, can we find another site for a fire station? In which case, they don't have to move to a temporary facility. And it can be fairly expensive to relocate on an interim basis the fire station and the library. Well, what if we could leave Verdugo where it is? Can we find another site for a fire station? Then you build it, and then when it's done, they just move over, and frankly, you could leave the library where it is. We've tried to think of a lot of different options for pursuing this. None of them are easy. A number of options could be good, but none of them are easy.
Even land exchanges we've looked at in that immediate area, and any number of things to try to leverage what our current assets and an exchange of property with another location. So,
Do we have a preliminary cost for building a fire station at current 26 location?
yes, that's included in the
That's
budget.
what you have here in the CIP.
Which is?
10 million.
Yeah, that's anticipating the
And-
station is built where it is.
Yeah, and actually, and Mr.
12 million.
Zern can comment on this more. If we were speaking about this a year ago, I think the actual construction cost now, we're looking at things a little more favorably than we were a year ago, a little more competitive. But there's also the projection of a lot of public needs around the state here in the short-term future. So.
For myself, I think we should move forward with 26. Whatever you need to do, even if I don't think you're going to find anything in that area, and I know that real well. It's going to cost you millions of dollars to buy anything for this purpose because you need a lot bigger site. To me, life and safety is more important. Not that libraries aren't, but you could lease a space, and just like we've done in Adams Square, temporarily until we find a place for the library. But you cannot run a fire station from a temporary location forever. You could do it maybe for about a year and a half. That's about it. That's 24-hour operation. People have to get in, get out quickly, and you got a lot of life and safety issues. So to me, the sooner you move forward with the project, Fire Station 26, I'll feel more comfortable as some of these projects come online. At least you have a permanent location for that, and then we just have to look for a better place for the library.
Well, I haven't made the decision whether I think 26 should be knocked down and replaced yet, so that's my perspective. I think we still have a lot of homework to do. I don't know about you, Mr.
Agreed.
You agree, Mr. Weaver?
I think that's it.
Okay.
That's our last slide.
Go ahead.
Okay. Anything, that's actually all the information we have. So, any further questions? I think we've got some good direction to come back with some additional information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Draymond?
Yeah, just a brief comment, and it relates to what my colleague, Councilmember Yusefian, was saying. Yes, there is a sort of public safety issue to not moving or working out of a temporary facility, but there's nothing that says we have to do that. In other words, if we don't move on that right now, then we're not operating out of a temporary facility, and it does provide some time to find an alternative library site. So it's not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. There's an extra option in there, and that is to sit tight until we find both. I don't think it's been established that we're losing any capacity. We're not losing lives because of the Station 26 being where it is right now. So we do have the time to look. I agree. It's going to require substantial more homework on this. Thank you very
Well,
much.
the only thing is that longer you wait, cost of construction is not going any lower.
Understand.
Steel is not getting any cheaper, and neither is concrete.
You could,
And so,
no question, you
so
could.
long as we're willing to put it aside, keeping in mind that we're going to have to spend more money on this, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Why stop with fire stations? We can put that in blazing bold letters above the entrance to the city. That goes across the board.
Yeah, lumber's already
Every
come
project
down.
that we're looking at.
And in fact, when you get eventually to a discussion of a neighborhood or community pool, you're going to see that dynamics in play very clearly.
I might just close it. These are really essential facilities within the community. Some of them serve the community very well. Others really do it marginally in terms of the community access. We've got some tremendous opportunities now to improve that. The community's spoken. They've asked for additional training in a number of areas. Fire stations, I think, are a reflection of the community. And certainly we've got a couple of facilities that we need to do some work on. I'm prepared to do that at whatever your direction is. And we remain available. We'll report back with some additional information. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, what's next?
If I could refer us back to our CIP draft number 8, and we'll go back to page 3 of 19. So we have covered the first two items on here, which are the fire stations 26 and 29. Our next item is neighborhood business district improvements. This amount is for $50,000 a year for each of the next 10 years. And this is to assist the various business districts in the city or to assist them in forming a business district.
This comes our redevelopment money?
No.
No.
This is
In addition?
This is just the one. This is an addition to that.
Okay.
This is an addition to that.
I do have a question on that.
Mr. Daly.
What, just as an example, give me an example of something that we've done similar to that recently, or not recently, just so I have an idea.
This would be capital improvements associated with business districts of which we haven't identified it, but the work in Spar Heights, the work in Kenneth Village, this just leaves a small amount of money that could be used for capital improvement upgrades, whether it's
capital
plantings or furniture or lighting.
I guess what I'm getting at is this the 15?
No, this is not the 15,000.
No.
The 15,000 is in Mr. Lanzafame's pot of money.
That's correct.
This is capital improvements out of, call it the general fund capital improvements. Not identified, just there in case a need arises in the course of a year among the business districts. Unlikely you'd get a need from Adams Square because the improvements have been so replete there, but Spar Heights, maybe something small comes up in a year that's needed. This money's just a pot of money that's available each year.
And is there do we have a policy developed as to a sequence of districts, or if, let's say, Adams Square got it 3 years in a row, would they be precluded or have a lesser priority for the fourth year than, let's say, a Spar Heights or a Brand Boulevard or anything. Well, Brand Boulevard's outside. I know that's redeveloped, but another district.
Mr. Mayor, in years past, we had each district, they would submit a proposed project, and we put them in a 5-year queue, and so we could kind of keep track of all of them. They all have had something. This is a nominal amount that we keep an informal running tally of who's done what. As you say, Adams Square has had quite a bit of work. Spar Heights had the most recent with the small park area and parking that was done in front of
Kenneth Village had a significant improvement and upgrade
Kenneth
on all
Village
their
had
infrastructure. So all of your business districts are really in relatively good shape. We just felt the council would want to have some small amount each year that if something arose that needed to be addressed, there'd be some capacity for it. But there's been no formal program attached to this money.
Okay, and my only thought is that when we do decide that we maintain some sort of equity and not just the squeaky wheel getting the grease, and some business districts are less organized and less adept at bringing their issues and causes for improvement to the city. So as long as we keep some sort of... And is that something that comes to council directly, or is this fly under
No, if
council's
there were a need
radar?
for this, it would come back to you, because this isn't identified as to what it would be used for.
Okay.
So anything would have to come back to you for approval.
Okay.
I don't think we
So
anticipated...
you like squeakiness?
No, I'm just saying that, there's certainly...
I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer.
We just want to be fair. I mean, I think some districts are well-versed at bringing attention. We just have to be fair, I think, to some of the others.
But in many years, we have spent a lot more money than $50,000.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that we hadn't anticipated
Some
a formal
places
program
we
being
needed
wrapped
it.
around this, only because it is such a small amount. It's sort of a contingency in case something not otherwise planned for pops up.
As a, I guess, current and former squeaky wheel, or one of the former spokes in a squeaky wheel up in Montrose, I just want to say that sometimes, again, it's a morning about concept. That is not necessarily also just about where the money has gone recently or the last time or the time before. It's also where the need is. There are areas that don't squeak because the need isn't as great as some other area that has a greater need. In order to develop the tools for that business district to do a lot of things, not only support itself, but also contribute more dollars to the city of Glendale through their sales. So something else to keep in mind also.
Okay, moving along, we will go into our public works projects. These are, the first four that you see here are annual programs, mainly dealing with streets, but the first one that you see up here is our ADA facility modifications. Start off at $400,000 per year and increase it at the latter end of the 10 years up to $450,000.
It might be important here before Steve steps up to just note that this is a place where you might want to keep the CIP draft number 8, page 1 of 4, unfunded requests near at hand while Steve goes through the programs that are outlined in your regular CIP, because these different projects he'll touch on is not the full need. And additional funding, which probably still doesn't reflect the full need, is over in the unfunded request list that you have. Right, Steve?
Page 8, you said?
Correct.
Page 8?
Oh, actually, it's this small little handout is the unfunded. It's the CIP draft number 8, page 1 of 4, up at the top.
Okay.
And you notice some of the bigger numbers. You'll see there, Fire Station 29 reconstruction, some additional funding in there, but down under Public Works projects, you'll see every one of almost every one of the major capital improvement projects has an additional funding request that right now isn't incorporated in the CIP.
Yeah.
Steve's Public Works project is as much about what he can't do as what he can do.
Correct.
Okay.
But on some of them, didn't we put more money into it, like the street refacing program?
We did.
Didn't it used to be like 800,000 or something like that?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, absolutely. This council has been very supportive. It's just that gap
need
is
is so
very
great.
large, and it's kind of tough to get there. But we have continually looked at putting additional funds in. We put additional funds in last year. We've looked at putting inflators on there. So we've been working at it. It's just a situation where keeping up is very very complicated and very costly.
Now, Steve, we have, what you need to note here under the public works projects, particularly the street projects, is if you flip over to page 6 of 19, that's where we have the gas tax allocations as well.
And that's exactly where, if you look at the gas tax, that's the money that's allocated to the city for the express purpose of maintaining the infrastructure. The first, page 3 numbers that you're looking at is in what I call, and what Mr. Allers calls it, the general CIP fund. Those are the additional monies that the council has added to the gas tax to augment those monies for our programs.
So as an example, the gas tax projects that are outlined on page 6 of 9, you can't take the gas tax money and spend it for anything other than streets, curbs, and gutters.
Right.
You can change the projects, but you can't change the purpose. You couldn't use gas tax money to build a library. The allocation on page 3 of 19 you can use for any capital project that you desire. We happen to propose allocating additional money to the gas tax in this way for these street projects. And then if you were so inclined, there's additional money that could be, that if you had the resources, Steve would ask for on the unfunded list.
Okay, so $1.9 million that you have for 2007, 2008 on gas tax, you're going to take that and you're going to add another $500,000 to that.
Well, actually, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, if you look at the bottom line, we have $4 million in gas tax. That's about our annual allocation.
looking at individual
I'm just
projects.
trying to understand what he's saying, because...
That's correct.
Right, that would be
correct.
correct. You'd add the two
So
together.
his total amount for street resurfacing would be $2.46 million.
What page are you referring to?
We're
Which
referring to
column?
page 6 and page 3 of 19.
Right.
If you look over on page 6, that's where the gas tax projects are located.
Okay.
You see 3 of them there: street resurfacing, gutter construction, and street reconstruction. In 07-08, there's $1,960,000 for street resurfacing. In the general fund CIP, there's an additional $500,000 in 07-08. So the total amount of money Steve would have available for resurfacing is $2,460,000.
Right.
Correct.
Now, you have existing balances in here.
Correct.
200,000, 132,000, 400. Now, these are encumbered?
No, Mr.
They're
Mayor,
not
Councilmember
encumbered.
Yusefian, in fact, if you look at the gas tax, you'll see there's $6.6 million of existing money.
So that is not encumbered?
It's not encumbered.
We
but-
have no projects that
No.
we have assigned this to?
No, yes. 2 weeks
Yes,
ago...
so it is encumbered?
It's not encumbered. It's not officially encumbered. But 2 weeks ago, you awarded a contract. When that contract, when those you awarded 2 contracts for almost $1 million. When those are signed, then Mr. Allers are encumbered.
So
Tonight,
let me put the question, are they programmed?
they're programmed.
They're programmed.
Oh, okay.
They're not encumbered.
That means I have no money to spend. That's
Right.
already been
Right.
programmed.
That's
Oh,
correct.
okay.
Our goal, and we've been pretty successful the last 3 years, is to spend just about every single penny we get on the year we get it.
And how about the 200,000, 130?
Same way.
Those are
Same way.
programmed already?
Yes.
Yes.
So you spend every dime?
Yes.
Okay.
Down to the penny.
So don't tease me like that.
It wasn't intentional, I assure you.
I got money.
Sure. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the programs you look, and I know we've been through this explanation, so bear with me if I'm redundant or boring you on this, but we have our main core maintenance programs, and it's really a 3-phase process that you go through, depending on the condition of the street. The first level is slurry seal. This is a liquid application with some fine aggregate in it that you're able to put on and seal the street and keep the weather off of it, keep the ride quality up. When the street gets to a certain point, you no longer can slurry seal, you go to resurfacing. This is where you grind about 1 inch to 2 inches off the street and put a new layer of asphalt on that street. That's the second level. The third, the absolute top level, would be reconstruction. This is when you take the street completely out, rebuild the base, and rebuild the street. All of Brand Boulevard that we recently finished, complete
And how thick is
reconstruction.
that?
That's 4 over 6. So that's 4 inches of asphalt over 6 inches of aggregate. I'm sorry? And sub-base, right. We get really good compaction in the soil here in Glendale. And we use a geotextile liner and then put aggregate on top of that. Mind you, I always put the plug in. A great deal of the aggregate on Brand Boulevard was exactly what we took out. We just ground it back up and put it back down. So good recycling effort there.
Is it a truism? Yasmin, thank you. That the slurry seal will last so long, the overlay lasts so long, based on weight, eventually, in the cycle of repair, you're going to have to take out heavily used streets and replace.
Correct, Mr. Weaver, you will. Depending on the use of the street, keep in mind we classify our streets four
Like
categories.
Grand or Broadway, yeah.
Major arterial, minor arterial, neighborhood collector, and residential. Just to give you an idea, about 54% of our streets are residential. They obviously take less of a traffic burden. If we're able to stay on top of those streets and keep them sealed, you could probably seal them 2 or 3 times more often than you could a major or minor arterial that takes the beating that you're talking about, not only with heavy-duty equipment, buses, and the beating that buses put on streets. The idea is if you can keep your maintenance cycle up to date, rule of thumb in American Public Works Association is if you could do about 10% a year, which for us would be close to 40 miles, and we're probably doing maybe 10 to 12 miles. So if you keep that maintenance cycle up, you can keep these streets going a lot longer before you get to that reconstruction, which costs quite a bit of money. It's the old, if you remember the old Fram oil filter commercial, pay me now, pay me later. The asphalt pavement cycle takes a huge drop when you get to a certain point, huge drop in quality, huge increase in cost to repair it. So last couple of years, my goal has been to pour a lot of slurry seal money into the residential streets to try to keep those up.
One other question, trying to recall. Utility companies now that are coming in to our streets, especially the ones we've spent money on resurfacing or replacing, we now require them to come back at a higher standard, make the street whole like it was, even if they have to resurface the entire width?
It's correct, Mr. Weaver. Our excavation ordinance that was passed about almost 2 years ago has requirements, actually puts moratoriums on certain streets. So if we just finish them, you'll have to wait 3 years before you can cut them unless it's an absolute emergency service that needs to go in there. That's why when we did Brand, we got everybody who operates in the city, including our own utility, to go through and replace their infrastructure and their substructures because at a minimum you get a 3-year moratorium. Then after that, we have specific guidelines on how you cut and how you repair, and depending on where that cut is, how far you have to pave. Minimum, usually what we try to do is get at least from the center line to the edge of the gutter if you're working in a particular lane, even if it's a parking lane.
I was just driving up on Foothill yesterday, and there's a section in the county where they did some major work in there. Drive over there, it's very rough now. I don't know if they have plans to resurface that in full section of, it's east of Ocean View.
Usually if we get a good cut and a good repair, then maybe you might just do a slurry seal aesthetic to try to get some continuity in the look of the street, especially if it's a really new street. So I wanted to show you quickly, if you're interested and have the patience, is some quick pavement management data that we have. Pavement management system this is our 3rd generation of our pavement management system, and this is where the street condition is assessed, put into a database, and then the data spit out on the condition of the street.
So, Steve, you inventory every section of the street.
Absolutely.
And you assess its current condition and its
That's correct.
need for improvement.
We assess it from an engineering technical basis. It also gets a ride quality test. And then any special conditions that may exist on a particular
Steve,
street.
is this block by block or several blocks? What's a section? Do you know?
No, Mr. Starber. The way we do it is classified into those 4 categories: major, minor, collector, and residential. And as you can imagine, it takes a pretty long time to put this data together. But overall, now here, pavement management system ends up, as I said, takes the inventory of your streets, assesses the quality to that inventory, and gives you your pavement quality index, your PQI. This is ours today, and 0 to 100%, 100% being best, we're currently at 73.
And the cities go, are we in good shape?
We're in very good shape, yes. We're in very good shape, and this is where we made a decision several years ago that we wanted to be somewhere in that 70 to 75% range. Obviously, it's almost impossible to get to 100. There isn't enough money or time to get there. If you can imagine, you'd have to be doing a street every day almost to keep it at that. So we decided that this was a good quality index for us to shoot for, and that's been our goal. I will tell you again, in that pay me now, pay me later scenario you'll see in a few minutes, this can degrade very quickly if you don't keep up with it. But you can see we've got the majority of our streets are in that very good to excellent range where we want to be.
Well, Steve, how do you reconcile the fact that we're only doing 12 miles at the recommended 40, but yet we're still in a very good range?
Well, the last several years, Mr. Najarian, we've put a lot of money into slurry seal, which has helped us tremendously, and we've also invested a lot of money in our major arterials. If you can think back on some of the streets that we've done, Colorado, Brand, all stretches of Brand up to the freeway from the southern portion up to the freeway. That has helped us tremendously by attacking those streets that had lowest PQIs, so that's kept us where we're at. But a very good question, and you'll see, as you feel comfortable about the 73 as I do, you'll see in a few minutes how that can unravel quickly for you if you don't stay up on top of it. And we're really, really right on the edge of beginning to go down that slope.
Mr. Weaver?
So, Steve, the ones that are very poor are the ones that we start to see come in as contracts for street replacement, right?
That's correct. You'll see our reconstruction program is where you get the, and you can see
Glen Oaks from the Burbank border to Grandview then falls in what category?
That is a reconstruction, so it's going to be somewhere down in that fair to poor area.
That's what we have tonight.
You have that tonight, yeah, and very expensive. It's estimated approximately $4 million. Tonight's adopting plans and specs.
What do you have on very poor? What's very poor?
Well, luckily you can see we don't have too many of those.
Oh, yeah, but you do have some.
We do have some.
Where is that?
Residential.
Yeah, that's why I think it might be important to note also the different categorization of streets, which will affect prioritization of your money. Frankly, we give most attention and most money to the major arterials. That's the most miles. So as we heard during our neighborhood meetings, for example, up in Spar Heights, we had a number of residents from which little street?
Piedmont.
That street, those folks in Piedmont probably figure they're in that very poor down to the failed category, and they wanted to get moved up in the prioritization someplace. Most of the money goes in the major arterials, the streets that have the most traffic. So you can have down in that very poor fair area, probably predominantly residential areas.
And
in terms of miles of street.
True. The total report breaks down every street in Glendale.
Correct.
By category. So if anybody wants to know where they are.
And we'll have that for you, that compiled rather large document. This is a snapshot of that really hits the salient points that we want to...
Steve, of our money, how much... Now, gas tax, can you use gas tax on any category of street?
Correct,
Any
yes.
type of street? So you could use gas tax money in residential areas?
Yes, you can.
About what proportion do we spend in residential areas versus major streets?
Probably with most of the slurry sealing, you can see there in that small yellow box, you get over the unit cost. You can see that slurry sealing is the cheapest, 20 cents per square foot. That's what it's based on. That's the majority of the treatment we give to the residential. So while we're doing a lot more miles in the residential areas, we aren't doing the higher dollar repairs. So you're seeing the money is down. So I'm going to say it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of what we do.
Yeah, but the problem is that you have some residential streets that are so alligated, it's almost turning into gravel, and that's where the very poor is. And let's not forget when Mr. Quintero just got elected and he bought his house up down on that hill. Every time I drove up there, I felt like I was driving in a third world country street because it was so badly alligated until it got done. And so we have, even though it's in a residential area, we're looking at a residential area with $1 million homes with a street looks like it's Tijuana. So, and no offense to Tijuana, some places of Tijuana are very nice too. But I'm telling you, this is the problem that some people come to me and complain about, that I have a $2 million home and my street hasn't been paved for 50 years. And he's lived there for 60 years. So we need to also give something to the people who are in that very poor category as far as the street is concerned. So we just don't, you can't even slurry seal those.
Correct.
And you've driven those. You know. I've taken you around and showed you some of them. And you go, Jesus, we didn't know. I mean, we have some alleys that are even dirt. So we need to deal with some of these things so we don't have that very poor anymore. Now, in here, what I see, the numbers to the left, the 2 million, 4 million, 6 million, what are those? That's the amount of money? What is that?
No, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Eustachian.
That's the miles?
We'll take the best.
Feet?
We'll take the very good category. 32,000 square feet of our streets are in the very good category.
Okay.
And just to follow up on your
So,
earlier...
for example, 1 million square feet is in bad category?
That's, looks like it'd be about a million.
Okay. So 1 million is in a bad category, and 32 million, not 1,000, 32 million
Excuse me,
is in
32
good.
million.
Okay. So if we want to, do you have a chart that shows the cost?
For taking the very poor to
Yeah.
something better than that? We can do that for you. I don't have it with me right now.
Okay.
Well, and when I say that, if you bear with me, we're going to get into, I'm going to show you where we need to maintain our 73 to 75 area. But to go back to something you said, I thoroughly agree with you. It's just that the residential streets have tended to, because of the lack of funding that we have to do everything we want, we have tended to take the lower priority to the major and minor arterials and even the neighborhood collectors. They're streets that I'm guessing have probably not been paved since they were built. And I don't want to get into a situation that many agencies are now in, and some of my brethren in the field have absolutely given up on the residential. They just decided not to put any money into them. They're letting them go. There's cities in Orange County, there's cities that are neighboring us that are thinking about not putting any money back into their residential streets because
So that's
they're
why people
focusing,
buy Hummers, huh?
they're focusing
That's
all
why
of
they
their
can drive the
efforts
street.
into the major and minor arterials. It's a balancing act that you have to try to juggle, but I agree with you. And that's why we have, for the last 3 years, gone into the neighborhoods, put most of our slurry seal money down in order to protect those streets and preserve them.
John, still.
Oh, no, I was just curious whether Councilmember Quintero wanted to make a comment about his home being at the top of a street going through a third world country.
No, it's very nice now. It's very nice. It's all redone, and it's
I'm still trying to figure out what alligated means.
It's like a back of an alligator. If you've seen the back of an alligator, how it's all cracked
that a real
up all
word?
over.
Yes. It's actually a technical term.
Yes.
Alligated.
So when you look at the asphalt,
There's
and the
there's a picture of alligator asphalt on the far left-hand side of the handout here.
Well,
And
that looks like an alligator to me.
Correct.
That.
it just doesn't bite.
With a hole.
It just swallows your whole. It
As Steve,
swallows your
Steve will
car.
tell you, at that point, preventive maintenance doesn't work anymore. All you can do is generally tear it up. That was a good picture on the very last page of that handout.
And we'll move on now, unless there's any more questions about the
this is alligator, big
PQI,
time.
Pavement Quality Index.
Slurry seal won't help
Okay.
the street on
Won't
the
help
last
there.
page.
That's throwing good money after bad there.
Yeah.
So the next slide, here's the famous pay me now, pay me later maintenance life cycle, pavement life cycle. This was developed by the American Society of Civil Engineers, and it's pretty much been the rule of thumb that public works agencies have used. But you can see as you begin to drop into those categories what the cost is. And I look back, I remember when I started in this business, that 539 was about $2, and the 841 was about $5. So
That's per square foot.
per square foot. So the whole idea here is you see how costly, and I've said that it can be to try to get, when you've let the street degrade to the next level. So that's why it's important to try to keep the maintenance up and keep yourself in that 75% life area.
And Steve, doing that, how often would you, if you had all the money you needed, how often would you slurry seal a street?
Residential street, Mr. Starber, you can get a good 10 to 12 years out of it. You know, you might want to keep it at 10 because in Southern California we deal with the issue of oxidation, which is every bit as bad as wear. So you want to keep it sealed. You want to keep the cracks sealed so that no water infiltrates the street and then begins to erode the base, because that's where you get the major structural defects in the street.
It also depends on your rain season.
Correct. But it's best as you can to keep that seal on there, and at 20 cents a square foot, you know, it's a bargain. So we want to try to spend. Some agencies you'll see, smaller agencies, that's all they do is slurry seal. That's all they really can afford to do to try to keep their streets sealed. We've tended as an agency with larger major and minor arterials is to not use slurry as much. And I wanted to reverse that, at least in the residential areas where we can still salvage streets. We are attempting to salvage those streets, get the seal on them, and protect them.
Does the use of the rubberized asphalt, how favorably does that compare to the traditional asphalt in terms of, I know noise is a factor, and longevity, and I guess ability to be slurry sealed or alligated,
Mr. Mayor, it's worked out very, very well. We're beginning to find ourselves in our second generation of rubberized asphalt. It's almost become the norm today to use rubberized asphalt. Not only in reconstruction and in resurfacing. The Green Book, which is the handbook for street infrastructure construction, also has guidelines for pothole patching with rubberized asphalt, and there is even a rubberized slurry base. So there's rubber particles inside the slurry that you put down to help with the traction. It's worked very, very well.
And last question before I go to Mr. Quintero. Are there any health risks, additional health risks with the rubberized asphalt as it breaks down and begins to form a particulate matter?
None that I have heard about or have any experience with. That has not been an issue that has come up with the asphalt.
Okay. Mr. Quintero.
I have a technical question. Looking at the Belmont Street between Broadway and Wilson, you see these long cracks.
Okay.
That's true of many streets. How effective would it be to actually have street crews that would widen out the cracks a bit and attempt to seal it? Because other than that, the rest of the street looks fairly reasonable. You just see long cracks.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Quintero, that's technically the program for a slurry seal. So you come in and you route the cracks out, and then you fill them with a tar-like material and seal those cracks, and then you put the slurry seal.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Rather than going to the slurry seal, is it also effective just to fill those cracks?
It is, Mr. Quintero. Many agencies do it. The problem is, and what we've always done in Glendale is, when you fill a lot of those cracks, the aesthetics, it doesn't look good. People call it spider webs and snakes on their street because the material we use is jet black, and it contrasts with the street. So we've always put a slurry over it, not only just for aesthetics, but also to improve the ride quality, because the slurry seal does improve ride quality as well.
Well, leaving the aesthetics...
But you can do it, Mr.
Yeah,
absolutely, you can do it.
Leaving the aesthetics aside, it just seems to me it's a much cheaper way to go about keeping the deterioration at bay, at least for
absolutely,
a few more
Mr.
years.
Quintero.
Do we have any crews that currently do that?
We don't do that in-house. We contract that work out, but we've got a whole list of streets that need crack sealing that we could easily do without even putting the slurry on it. What I've asked the staff to do is let's try a couple of places that are pretty visible and see what the reaction is.
So we got spider webs, snakes, alligators.
Alligators back,
and
yeah.
Mr. Starbird.
Well, not in that order, I hope.
Just very quickly, in my former life preceding Glendale, we did crack sealing and we didn't do slurry sealing. Before I left there, the council was allocating funds for slurry sealing. You get a lot of comments from residents because, and the public works people will tell you that crack sealing will be effective whether you slurry or not, but the aesthetics in a neighborhood, especially if you have a street that has a lot of cracks on it,
yes,
aesthetically it's just not nice looking when they get done. So you'd hear a lot from residents if you crack sealed and didn't do a slurry seal on top of it.
Mr. Draymond.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that same sentiment. Even in areas that I've been involved in, in getting some repaving, it's all I can say is if we move to that route, I hope that my colleague, Mr. Quintero, will field all of the incoming calls from the local residents because aesthetically it is not a good-looking situation.
I will add something because obviously the crack sealing precedes the slurry sealing, and there's usually a pretty fair amount of time between those two. I always get complaints. And I just keep reassuring them we'll be back to put the slurry coat on. It'll look like brand new, but I invariably will get complaints.
I think actually the slurry sealing afterwards, it protects you.
It helps.
There's no question.
Because you can never seal a crack 100%. There's always going to be little holes here and there that water can penetrate. And I've seen crack ceilings done, and afterwards we had a lot of rain, and they come up. But the ones that get slurry sealed stay down.
Correct.
So
No question, that's the preferred method. I think Mr. Quintero might have been getting at is if we fight for every dime, how can we maximize our dollars? And that's one way you can do it. But you're right, Mr. Yusefian. Aside from the aesthetics, the seal is very important. So the pay me now, pay me later. That's that. This is the next 10 years. And obviously, years on the left, next column budget. This is the budget that Mr. Allers has plugged into the CIP for these programs. So we're using actual current funding level numbers. The work program column you see there is actually the calculation that the computer, the software program does, which you can see is almost to the penny. We just simply rounded it up into the budget column. Deferred maintenance. You begin to see that's the scary column as you begin to see the deferred maintenance grow. And we have, as we put a little bit more in, you actually see our PQI goes up. So the next couple of years we have some sufficient funding. But you quickly see it drop. I don't know, Ron, if you could put the arrow right about that 66, that's where you start to get worried. Actually, I get worried at 68, to be honest with you. And when you get down to 62, I can almost guarantee you that's a hole that is very difficult to dig your way out of without some alternative funding. We've seen other agencies go to bonds to try to get their streets back in order, and that's where you start to feel that pain down there at that 64, 62, 60 range. And that's on a citywide average.
Mr. Draymond?
I was just saying, for the record, that's a alligated background.
Very observant.
Steve, let me ask you a question. When we're talking about the deferred, are we comparing our 12 miles to the 40 miles, or are we comparing our 12 miles to our 12 miles?
We're comparing actual to what the evaluation of the street was. So actual condition to actual condition of the street and our PMS evaluation to the 73 to 75% area.
So, Steve, how much should we be spending to stay at a 74?
That's my next slide, Mr. Starbird.
Next slide.
There you go.
And it's $10 million.
So you should be spending twice as much to stay at the, well, not quite,
No,
yeah, almost twice as much,
Right.
not quite twice as much to stay at the 74.
Now you'll notice the way the software works this, and it's interesting, is knowing that there's only so much work you can do each year. You'll see it top loads it, so it starts to drive your PQI up even higher than what your goal area is, knowing, and it's also a way for them to try to equalize the money, so you're not taking huge hits at the end to try to maintain the 73. So it's equalized that, or spread evenly, the budget. So you get yourself all the way up to a 77, which even exceeds what our goal would be, finishing that 10-year cycle at about a 72, which is right around where we are, a little bit less, but 72. And obviously, as you get closer, if it's a desire to say, we get to 2012 or 13, we want to make sure we keep that 75 in those last couple of years, we can inject some more money at that time. And you can see the deferred backlog goes way down.
And Steve, how much were we spending on streets 10 years ago? More than we are today, right?
Yeah, I'd say,
As far as I recall.
yeah, Mr. Starbird, we were spending, boy, even with inflation, probably close to double what we do now.
Yeah, as I recall, we were in that $8 million range 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So when you consider the cost of inflation, we were probably spending this equivalent 10 years ago on an annual basis.
You have to remember that just the gas tax money alone is it's cents per gallon. It's not price-based. So we were getting about the same amount of money gas tax-wise 15 years ago as we are today. We were getting about $4 million a year just at a gas tax.
And your purchasing power is eroded easy by a third.
Oh, easy for the last 15 years.
But we were putting in $4 million on top of it.
Right, you're putting a
now
lot of money on
here
top
we're
of it.
getting the same money, we're just putting a little bit, or actually putting barely anything,
Right.
500,000 on top of
Right.
it.
Correct. So while the number is big, it isn't actually as alarming. And when we went into this latest iteration, I was, fasten your seatbelts kind of thing when they
So
showed
do you
me
have
this
any
and
strategies how to get there?
how to get there.
or your strategy is, council, you deal with it?
No, we
How do we get there? How do you give me an option? How can I get to that? When the police chief came in here, wanted more police officers, gave me an option. It says, here's a strategy, you can get there doing X, Y, and Z. Do I have a strategy? Do you have a strategy how I can get there?
Well, we've thought about a few of those things, and some of them as radical as maintenance districts in residential areas to try to get the residential streets and things like that. But really, it comes down to the CIP and what it can absorb as far as the streets go. We'd be happy to go back and brainstorm as much as we can. You know, we go after the grants very aggressively.
Yeah, but grants are not going to be as stable as this. This is almost $5 million extra every year. So where do you come up with that? Have you brainstormed to see what programs you can cut to add to that? You know, that the whole business that is being so radical, it's not as radical as you think. Many cities have gone out, and Spokane being one of them, went out there, the whole city went out there and passed a giant bond, but everybody kind of was, you know, bought into it because they gave them a schedule of your street will be done at such and such year, your street will be done such and such year. So everybody knew that they were getting their streets done, and they weren't just paying something for nothing. So, you know, somewhere down the line, we need to catch up, or we will end up with your first scenario. I don't want to be known as the city of Glendale 10 safest, but you get a whiplash every time you drive through the streets.
I agree.
This is a problem every city in California faces because we have not ever had an effective means of funding streets and roads at a local level. Now, ever is a long time. We might have had back in the 50s and the 60s when our highway system and road systems were expanding. But in the same way that Caltrans cannot effectively maintain everything they built, even though with bonds they're building new ones and they can't maintain them, cities haven't, I don't think, have ever had an effective means of funding street maintenance. The vast majority of cities depend on their gas tax money. They don't have the means to even supplement their gas tax, and that's why you see in city after city indexes that are far below where Glendale is. We for many, many years, have supplemented our gas tax revenues, but most cities don't have that luxury to even do that. It's a huge problem. Now, not reflected in numbers here is the roughly $6 million we'll get if and when the state bonds are sold.
Correct.
Steve, you'd probably spread that money out over several years.
That looks like what we would try to do, is to try to bridge some of this.
So
right
that'll help a little bit, but no, we don't have a strategy to get us to the point of spending $10.5 million a year on streets.
Why wouldn't we use that money to get rid of some of the poor and the very poor, so then we don't end up in a scenario of pay me and pay me later?
You could.
And that's probably what we would do.
Yeah, Steve will bring you back a program and strategy for the $6 million if and when we see it in the bond money.
Because
For now,
$6
we don't
million
have a program.
today is going to give me a bigger bang than $6 million spread over 5 years, you know.
That's right.
And we're also expecting to get some repayment on the Prop 42 monies. That's already built in, okay.
But again, the state has had its gas tax set at pennies per gallon, as opposed to a percentage like a sales tax on that. So we are likely going to see consumption drop over the years, even though the prices may be rising per gallon. If gas tax were a percentage, at least it would likely be keeping up with inflation, and in these days of escalating gas prices but decreasing consumption, we'd have at least a fighting chance of keeping up with the cost of maintaining local streets. But local streets is something that I think anybody in the business will tell you has almost never been adequately funded at a local level. Gas tax doesn't even come close.
And there was some rumblings earlier this year from both the federal and the state legislature about changing the gas tax, and it died pretty quickly. It's just not something that's very favorable amongst Congress or the Assembly and the Senate's in approaching. So we sit at that 36.2 cents or 36.4 cents a gallon that we get from both the federal and the state as far as gas tax goes.
It's getting near 11, and let me ask as to where would be a good, I do have one speaker. Steve, when would be a good time for you to
Well, I'm almost done, Mr. Mayor. I'll buzz through these last ones, and I can end it right there, and it's really based more on your questions.
Okay.
That was
why
it.
don't you-
We just had some photos that we had up that is way of a reference to try to give you an idea what a major arterial is. Brand Boulevard, that's a major arterial. Here you go. And this is still a section of Brand, just in a different area, and it changes its classification to a minor arterial. Arden, between Pacific and Central, is the neighborhood collector. And then Country Club, recently done, as you can see. Country Club is a residential street. And then I just wanted to show some pictures of what a PCI, or the Pavement Quality Index, or Condition Index is. This is recently done, southern part of Brown Boulevard. Here's a 75. This is right around where we'd like to be on average in the city. Certainly it's faded. You see some cracking, but overall in good structural shape.
Now, how long ago did we do that one?
Off the top of my head, Mr. Yusefian, I don't know.
I think that was done maybe about 4 years ago.
That's probably about right.
Yeah.
Here's a 62. This is where we start to get into a little bit of trouble. And one, again, you see, I mentioned the oxidation, which takes a big toll on the street because of the weather we have here. Of course, we don't have to live with expansion and contraction of extreme temperature changes in the Midwest and other areas. But the sun and the heat do have some impact. But you can see the various cracking, cross cracks, longitudinal cracks. This is a street that definitely needs to be looked at. Possibly you could resurface it, but more than likely you'd have to reconstruct it. And then, of course, a place where you never want to be. There's the alligator, Mr. Najarian.
See? And you could see it's been patched all over the place. I mean,
Our in-house crews do a lot of patching, but at a certain point, it's almost a fruitless effort. I mean,
But there's all sorts of cuts you can see. I'm not sure what precipitated all that, but it looks like there's cuts.
more than likely those are utility cuts for some level of utility.
Look like
Oh, there, yes. I think he was referring to the straighter line. That's a longitudinal crack there, but up there where I see the pavement change in the left-hand upper corner could be a utility cut. So the various utilities come in and replace and upgrade their structures.
Do we
or
have any?
somebody had to work on their house and they had to replace the curb and gutter and they required to.
Maybe they put a new sewer lateral in.
Right.
Maybe a business comes in and a change of occupancy requires them to sprinkler up, so they haven't had sprinklers before, so they have to go out and cut the street to put that system in.
Do we have any other fine program or fee program in place? Let's say a vehicle were to have a gasoline spill on the pavement, aside from just cleaning it up and doing whatever the fire department does. And of course, I think that's detrimental to the life and longevity of the asphalt. Is there any sort of compensation that the city goes after?
Mr. Mayor, generally in an accident situation where the driver's at fault and they cause some level of damage to the infrastructure, whether they knock a light standard down or they damage a tree, or if the spill's significant enough that they've altered the pavement, they've undermined the pavement, we will include in our chargeback some level of figure for us to have to skin patch that or remove and replace it. It's very rare that happens, but you are right. Diesel and gasoline deteriorate the pavement.
Do we have a weight limit for our city streets?
We do in some areas. We have weight limits.
Is there
depending
any
on-
way of enforcing that?
Yes, the police department actually has been pretty diligent in that. We have a very aggressive no truck parking ordinance in the city that the police department goes after. The problem, Mr. Mayor, is you put a weight limit on certain streets, and the chances are that you're not getting a lot of heavy truck traffic on those streets anyways. But who's exempt from those? My trucks are exempt. Refuse trucks, they pound the pavement. Buses are exempt. That's the second leading pounder of the pavement. And, you're talking about street sweepers making tight turns and heavy pieces of equipment. Moving vans are generally exempt. When somebody's changing residence and they want to come into a neighborhood, if there's a weight limit on trucks, you let that go for a moving van to move somebody in. So you don't completely eliminate it, Mr. Mayor, although the police are pretty vigilant in making sure that weight limits are
Let me
enforced.
go to Mr. Starboard and Mr.
Well, I just wanted to point out, we've talked about funding for streets. A category of resources we've left out, because here in Glendale it's fully devoted to transportation, is the Prop A and C money. Prop A money, as I recall, was very restricted as to your ability to use it for streets.
Correct.
But Prop C money had more latitude for your use on street maintenance. Here in Glendale, we devote all of our A&C money to our bus transit system. I'll tell you, in many communities, they try and frankly get as much of their Prop C money as they possibly can to utilize it for street maintenance as opposed to transportation. And once upon a time, when there was lots of Prop A and C money out there and communities weren't using it, they were trading, as I recall, their Prop A and C money for general fund money. So at one point, for example, you could give Community A, if you were Community A and wanted to buy some transportation money, you'd give 50 cents on the dollar to Community B. You'd buy their transportation money. They'd take the free money, the freed up money, the unconstrained money, and use it for the street maintenance program or for other uses. So there was quite a trading and bartering system that existed for many years after Prop A and C were passed.
Okay.
But again, by policy, here in Glendale, we devote all of our A and C to our bus transportation system, whereas in many communities, their C money, to a large extent, is used for street maintenance on top of their gas tax funds. The Prop C money is how much, Steve, do you recall?
It's about $1.5 million.
Closer to $2 million a year.
And that any bus route, any street that's used for bus service is eligible for
C.
For C money.
Which
for
would be any
maintenance.
of our major arterials
Pretty
for the
much.
most part.
Even some of our residentials.
The heavy
Mr. Quintero.
I've observed throughout the years that some of the 6,000 square foot homes that are getting built in the hillsides, the kind of trucking that it takes to build that type of structure is really rough on the roads themselves, by the way. I mean, when you hauling the concrete blocks, the wood, etc. Seems to me we should tack on some extra fee for that type. I mean, it literally will tear a street apart. It'll take anywhere from 9 months to a year to build a home like that. And it's just, I mean, you start with the excavation, first of all, the bulldozers to do the work. Then the excavation heading back down, then finally the concrete trucks and hauling the block up. It's just a tremendous.
Always leaking oil.
Yeah, and they leak
Stop on the street.
oil. It's happened on my street a number of times.
What we've tried to do more aggressively in the last year or so is when we see damage that's been done to the infrastructure by development is to go after them for that. We try as best we can make the nexus in any development to get as much of the infrastructure repaired, replaced, installed as we possibly can. And then during the course of construction, if they damage something, we've been pretty aggressive of late in trying to go after them to make that repair. But you're right, Mr. Quintero, especially on those residential streets that are in that lower categories. They're already fragile, and it doesn't take a whole lot to tear them up even more.
trash haulers that are private trash haulers, what do we do with the money that we collect from them? Just a tipping fee? There is...
Well, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember...
Because we don't have a franchise fee.
We don't have a franchise fee, but we collect what's called a AB 939 fee from all the private haulers in the city.
That's a recycling fee.
It stays in the refuse fund, if that answers your question. That's where it goes.
There is no other fee we can attach to it for street usage fee to that?
I believe we can, and I'm going to come back to you with
So
something.
that would
on
be an idea that you could come back to us and attach something to that, so then maybe we can take that money and use it toward the streets.
And like I said, we're at
Don't wait too long.
We're at 15% now. I would come back with something just for discussion purposes, another 3% dedicated to the streets, and see what that gets us. But our friends in Pasadena do that. They have the same, relatively same. They call it a franchise fee, but it handles both their private haulers' recycling issues and also the road tax.
I think that's what we should do. We should look at every other avenue possible to increase the money to this category, or we will get ourselves into a hole that we will never be able to get out.
I agree, and let's look at perhaps adding something to speeding tickets to the extent that high speed increases the degradation of the longevity of those.
We'll look into that, too.
Of course, through the appropriate channels.
That's what's called
Wherever it's
burning
legal.
rubber.
Burning rubber. If there's nothing else, Mr. Starbird?
Well, all of us here have been keeping copious notes. I'm wondering, are there any key policy issues relative to the Public Works Streets program that we should be noting. I did note to try and develop a strategy for increasing revenues, such as the refuse trucks and other options that might be available. I think it's fair to say that on the unfunded request list, based on the index and the costs, if Steve had his way, these $500,000 a year requests for street reconstruction, street resurfacing would be more like $2.5 million each, which would be $5 million more, to put that in the proper perspective. Although, are there any other policy issues we should be taking away here this morning?
Mr. Seffi.
When we passed the downtown specific plan, we put in our EIR that certain streets are going to be widened and done as mitigation to the EIR by 2010. What I want to know is where in the strategies where in this capital improvement budget that has been put in.
Some's in the budget, in the consent tonight.
Well, that's the Caruso's area.
Mr. Mayor, council members.
I mean, Central, the rest of Central we were doing, some of the Colorado we were doing, some of the other stuff.
Most of that's in the unfunded area.
Okay, so how do you intend to do that? Are you going to program some of those things on the line?
If you're talking about what
Because Central could be one of the streets that hasn't been done for many, many years, and it's a reconstruction, so you could plug that in. So what I want to know is, at what point do I see this in the capital improvement budget that says, these are the programs, and we're putting these in here, and it's mitigation measure for redevelopment area, and if it is a mitigation measure to the EIR, question is, would the redevelopment be able to pay for that because it was a mitigation measure for the EIR in development area?
Well, any improvement that benefits a central project area and helps achieve the redevelopment plan could be eligible for use of redevelopment funding. You might also look at the potential for impact fees for subsequent development that come online, much like you would park and library fees for development. The difficulty you have there is, as we found out when, I think it's probably now been 7 or 8 years ago, when we last discussed a traffic impact fee in the downtown area, you have to take on an obligation of doing a lot of catch-up when you begin to charge people for the impact of incremental new people coming into town. And we had, at the time, I think we were looking at raising $10 or $12 million at that time, but we were going to have to commit to our capital improvement program $10 to $12 million in catching up. And frankly, the CIP couldn't support that.
It was more. It was like 18.
I forget how much it was, but it was 8 years ago. It was a large number.
Yeah.
That in order to justify the impact fee and collect it, the city had to be willing to commit to doing its share as well. And there was a lot of concern about our ability to do that.
Well, the impact fees may not be the right avenue, but as we go down the path, some of these projects that are going to build, they're going to generate some, taxes, not sales taxes. They're going to tax increments, and that could be a source of revenue that could be used to deal with some of these things.
And they will need to mitigate impacts that they have that will be assessed when you do an EIR. And there could be some contributions for street improvements, just like there was for the Americana.
Right. And I want to see those, because I don't want people to think that, gee, this council just passed the EIR, said they're going to take care of the traffic issues with that, but, gee, there's no way of funding it, so throw our arms out and do nothing. So,
well, and that was one of the issues to take up when and if, I guess, we get this $6 million from the bond measure was, do we want to put it towards that? A discussion today, do we want to put it towards the very poor streets?
Those are the things that I think between Mr. Starbird, Phil Lanzafane, you, staff needs to go and do the brainstorming, give us the options. All I'm doing is, as Mr. Starbird says, do you have any other policy issues? That's a policy issue, so I'm bringing it up. So we need to look at it, give us options, and then we can make a decision.
Okay, we're running later than I wanted to run, Mr. Starbird.
Again, just keeping in mind, structured in the capital improvement program, and believe me, you'll have 2 or 3 times this number of needs that will be identified. You have the to-be-programmed and contingency of about $26 million over 10 years, and a projected balance of about $16.5 million in the fund, or roughly $42 million over 10 years. At some point, you can begin to make some policy decisions about if there's surplus generated in a particular year, how those money could begin to be spent, priority-wise. Now, part of that could be new facilities you want to see built. Others could be putting more and more money into our streets program to the extent it's generated over 10 years. Again, we've got the street program programmed over 10 years, but you've got $42 million of unprogrammed money that, again, we could give you a list that would be 3 times that much in needs, and that's where the prioritization comes in.
Mr. Weaver.
Real quickly, this is my 11th year of dealing with the budget. We've had this exact same discussion for 11 years. There's competing interests in the CIP budget, and this no council I've ever served on has been able to get us where we would like to be. It's where we can afford to be at. That's just the reality of it.
Thank you. Let me take our speaker, Mr. Barry Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council, staff, and of course the public. I'm Barry Allen with Vanguard. By the way, there is a way that the council can really lend a hand and getting more money into the CIP, and maybe have a couple of bake sales a month, and do a bake sale and bring the money in and things like that. Things that have been suggested to other groups within the city. How many cookies can I count on you? Oh, just a few.
Okay.
My doctor says I can only have so many. Regarding the need for the fire stations, I really need to commend Chief Gray on the fact that Glendale has probably the best response time of any of the fire departments. Absolutely fantastic response time. But I've got a couple of problems. The council had been sort of sold a bill of goods before with the long-range planning from the community, and all of a sudden appeared on the council's the PowerPoint presentation was that the community said we need 2 fire stations. The community was never asked the question. The community who attended as advisors to the Downtown Specific Plan were also told on the last day of the meeting that the advisory body needed to approve a fire station, a new fire station at 26, without any input at all. And when we look at the presentation today, we see the word incidents of how many incidents there were from the city. In fact, it was reported as well in Vanguard this last weekend. And then we changed the number of responses. Some of those responses were actually canceled while AIQ, the apparatus in quarters. Some while the apparatus was out on the road on the radio. But nothing was mentioned about response time. Fires, the 2 rebuilt fire stations proposed, will not give us a better response time. And I think from the numbers that you have seen presented to you indicate that we really have more in the way of needs for paramedics. And I think Chief Gray was very candid when he said the number of fires we have gone down because of other circumstances, the building codes and things like that. So I think we need to look at possibly doing away with an engine. 1 engine can staff 2 ambulances, just like that. And I think we need to look at what the real paradigm is, rather than saying we just need the fire stations because we need them and it's cheaper to do it now than it will be later. Mr. Starbird had mentioned, I think, 2 weeks ago when Mr. Philpott was here that these are community gathering points. My gosh, we can't even get into a fire station to do an inspection of it, as opposed to it being a community gathering point. I certainly see that as Station 21, that it is there is a community facility. Now, we also heard that there have been no plans that were drafted through the needs developed by the Civic Technologies, the $68,000 consultant who looked at geocoding. Now, part of that was there are no plans. However, you see in the document that you were presented with today that the plans call for 18,055 square feet, and that is to take 1 station from 6,800
That's another 12,000 square feet, and the other one at 10,000 square feet, increasing at 8,000 square feet. Mr. Majorian, maybe they'll buy your building, and then we could have a whole, but you couldn't vote on it.
No comment on that issue.
I know,
Mr.
no, I understand. That's
You're tempting me.
I got you when you can't talk back. But, it's just like staff comments after oral communications. But I think those are some of the things that we really need to look at as we set aside all this money for the fire stations. The fact is, what are the real needs of the community? It's an aging community. And by the way, Chief Gray spoke that the major calls and the increase in population has been north of Station 26, whereas when we heard it from the downtown specific plan standpoint, the fact is that those calls should be going south to all the new development that's not happening on Brand Boulevard. So, and Central. So when we take a look at that, those are some of the paradigm changes that we really have to look at before we say, let's throw all this money into the CIP. I'm Barry Ellen for Vanguard, and there's my time.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Okay, Mr. Starbird, do you have anything final before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
No, sir. Thank you.
Will we adjourn?
Second? And we are adjourned.